Welcome to this webinar in a series on helping you navigate the resources and various options available to you as an operator. This webinar will focus on reopening or increasing your current operations with thoughts and insights directed towards workforce-related matters. This webinar is brought to you by Performance Food Group to provide you with ideas and resources to help you in this time of industry distress. Additional webinars and other resources can be found on Performance Food Group's website under COVID-19 Resources for Operators. Please take a minute and review the legal disclaimer. As businesses are in different stages of operations and opening, certain matters may or may not apply, or their application may be different based on individual facts and circumstances. Today's agenda will be focusing on providing thoughts and insights into various workforce-related matters as relates to reopening in three key areas: workforce planning, human resources policies, and communication. In each area, we will share our thoughts on what operators need to focus on now, next, and beyond, a concept from Richmond Sherm. My name is Keith Middleton, and I currently serve as the co-managing partner of Fahrenheit Advisors. I oversee our consulting and fractional financial management practices. Joining me today is Jennifer Stern.
Hello, everyone.
Jennifer is Fahrenheit's Director of Human Resources with a focus on culture, employee engagement and development, and compliance. She is a leader in the HR community with respect to best practices and forward-thinking HR strategies. Today, Jennifer will share her thoughts and insights into helping operators think about all things employees as relates to reopening and maintaining your operations. We've structured today's webinar in three different areas: workforce planning, HR policies, and communications. And we'll provide some thoughts and insights into now, which is pre-opening, next, which is day 1 to 30, and then beyond, what you should be thinking about 1 to 2 to 3 months out. And so with that, Jennifer, big picture, as operators begin to reopen or increase current operations, maybe they've been doing takeout only, what should they be focused on in today's environment?
The first thing I think they need to be focused on is communication. This is going to be key. You want to make sure your workforce feels that you're there for their health and safety above all other things. You also want to establish a larger purpose for your employees. Why are they there? Creating that sense of normalcy. They're helping create the community for when people come in and visit the restaurant. Also, it's important that you don't have surprises. Again, going back to that communication throughout this process. There's lots of new things happening, so that's important. You also want to make sure that your employees understand the changes that are needed in the workplace, the why. Why are there new safety guidelines? Why are there changes in policies? That type of thing. That will help them feel better about these changes as everyone's getting used to a new way to work. Going back to the health and safety, it's important that you have sufficient supplies, masks, gloves, whatever you need to have in your restaurant. You don't want employees wondering if those things are going to be there. And again, going back to keeping the open lines of communication, be proactive. You want to make sure you address these before the questions or concerns come up with your employees. You want to remember that if one person's thinking it, others are probably thinking it too.
Great. Yeah, I think communication and over-communicating is clearly key in this environment from an employee perspective. As we look into kind of this first section on workforce planning, what are a couple of things, and we're not going to go through all the bullet points in all these slides, so just as the listener can go back and look at the different points, but on each of these, what are a couple of things that operators ought to be looking at now from a workforce planning perspective?
I think it's important to really figure out what your pivotal roles are for business operations. This is going to be your foundation to ensure that your employees and customers are taken care of. The next two kind of go together. When you think about your workforce and you think about the people that are definitely going to be there and the people that might be there, and there's some people that just aren't going to be there. Think about their roles. Also, what can they do differently? Can they clean tables? Can they seat guests? Those types of things. As you're thinking about, again, the people that will always be there.
Yeah, one thing around the workforce and returning to work, the SBA came out yesterday with a notice that if you furloughed or laid off a worker and as part of the PPP process, you've asked them to come back to work to be rehired and they say no, from an operator perspective, the SBA is not going to ding you on your forgiveness reduction for that. So that is a key ruling as employers are trying to rehire and employees, for one reason or another, may say no. So that's kind of the now. As we're looking into the next, what's important?
Think of looking again at the cross training. If you have people that are going to be sick, you want to make sure that if someone else comes in, that they're able to do that job. Again, going back to the no surprises, if they show up. Also, this will help you maximize your staffing budget, depending on what your customer flow looks like, of making sure that you're using the people that are there and they're not just standing around. It's important to maintain that flexibility in your work schedules. People need to call in sick. You don't want them feeling like I can't get someone else to cover my shift because that 24-hour notice window has closed on that. You want to give people that opportunity to do what they need to do to be healthy and maintain your restaurant to stay healthy.
Great. And I guess lastly, with workforce planning, kind of the longer term, mid to long term, beyond.
At this point, you've already looked at your cross training. Keep assessing. What does that look like now that you've gotten through that first 30 days? How is your business? What changes do you need to make? This is a time where not only do employees need to be flexible, but the employers need to be flexible in how they're looking at their processes and procedures. And again, going back to that communication of making sure that people know that just because you're doing it for the first 30 days one way, you might need to change it based on what you're seeing. Also, make sure you're following safety protocols. This is going to build confidence for your team. And remember, going back to the why are we doing this?
Absolutely. And those safety protocols directly are observable by the customers.
Right.
And as a consumer that eats out a lot, you can tell the difference, and a consumer is going to make a decision of where they're going to go and go back to again and again. And I'd also say for the as relates to workforce planning, and we'll talk about this in the HR policy section, the now, the next, and the beyond in all of these is continuing to monitor the legislative developments as they are ever changing in this environment, and that will continue to have an impact on your workforce planning.
Absolutely.
So as we look at human resources policies, and this is an ever-changing environment right now, all the legislation, what's kind of the now highlights?
I think one of the big ones is the first bullet, knowing and understanding that the legislation that has come out and will probably continue to change as well, and incorporating that into your workforce planning. What HR policies do you need to revise? And looking at, to your employees, like, what do they need? They're not always going to understand all this legislation, so it's important to be educated on that yourself so you can help guide them when necessary.
Great. And then obviously with that is all the procedures that are coming with all that legislation.
Yes.
So as we look kind of past pre-opening into the next section of now, this is a big area.
Yeah, the temperature checks is one that's getting a lot of talk, especially within HR. And I think it's really important to figure out what you want to do and to really take some time to figure out, what will you do? What will your procedures be? How will you take these temperatures? When if somebody refuses to have their temperature taken? You really want to be ready for this and ready for every scenario. And you also need to keep in mind that to be compliant with ADA and EEOC for any record keeping that you do in any type of situation.
Then we kind of move into the next.
Yeah, so again, going back to that, you've gotten some gear in the beginning for your employees, but are you keeping sufficient stock? Things are moving pretty quickly. This goes back to that health and safety piece. You know, do you have enough masks? Do you have the gloves? Do you have the sanitizer as well? And this is just not for your employees, but also just for your restaurant in terms of keeping it clean. Implementing policies on uses of devices. You know, we always hear about cell phones being some of the biggest germ holders. So what are you doing? And make sure everyone in your restaurant is following those policies. How are you handling credit cards? Anything that is getting a lot of touch for that. Again, I think you're right when you say customers see these things. And so the more that they see that, you know, somebody isn't touching a phone or how they're handling a credit card is going to make them come back and tell their friends as well.
Okay. And as it relates to HR policies in the future and beyond.
Yeah, I know we keep talking about looking at, you know, what's working, but I think it's important that you've got to be flexible. You know, this is the time when you need to be assessing what your policies are. Does it make sense for your workforce? You know, making sure that everything is legal as well, and communicating, explaining the why. If you're changing a policy, you need to tell people why you're changing it. It's not bad to always change something, but there needs to be consistency and there needs to be a reason why you're doing it.
Great. So we've talked, you know, we opened up with a lot of conversations around communication. And so we just thought it was good as part of this to really dive a little deeper into communication and what does that mean in this environment. And so as we're looking at the reopening and communication, you know, what's a couple of things they really need to focus in on?
I think it's important for your employees to feel like that they understand what is acceptable behavior, but also that management is supporting them. So, you know, what are those things from employees as well as customers that are considered acceptable, and having their manager, their employer back them up when needed. You don't want people to be guessing of what they can do and not do.
And then once you're open.
So once you're open, you want to make sure information is easy to access. Do you have posters? Is it email notices? Is it a community board? How are people being able to get information? And making sure, I keep talking about communication, but it's not a one-way street. Communication is a two-way street. Do your employees feel like they can come to you and ask about questions, ask about updates, voice concerns, you know, and so you can make sure that you're addressing those things with them.
Great. And then kind of the beyond.
So you want to make sure you're taking the pulse of the employee morale. You know, when people are coming in, you want to make sure that they know what they need and that they have what they need. So again, take the stress out of guessing for them, and you know, foster that communication, that it's effective communication, and make sure it's effective. Ask them, do they have what they need? Are they getting the information the way they need it?
Great. And resources. You know, as always, you can find further information and details on today's subjects and others, as well as industry and legislative updates and resources on PFG's websites and Fahrenheit's Insight webpage, where we post new information daily. You'll receive a webinar survey. You can provide feedback and also ask additional questions. There will also be a document on PFG's website under resources with a little bit more detail and thoughts and insights on today's webinar. Thank you, and stay safe and healthy.